All right. So now to my part of the meeting, where I wasn't planning to do this at all a couple of weeks ago, but I have, and so here I am. So I've got a whole number of things I wanted to run through on Python. I know some of you are quite familiar with Python. Um, I 2 weeks ago had never programmed a line of Python in my life. So please bear with me as I go through some of this with respect to what I've done and how I'm doing it. But hopefully it will be of interest to you from a couple of perspectives that will become obvious as we go through the sort of presentation. Okay, so why is Python popular in the astronomy community? I guess some of this information was covered uh, earlier by Sean in the presentation he gave, I think, in meeting three. But basically, it's a relatively uses relatively simple syntax, and it's available through a number of platforms. I'm using Anaconda, using VP. Is it VP Spec? The add-on that does the sort of
VS Code.
VS Code. So I'm using VS Code. I did finally get that working, and I I stumbled across a video that basically said make sure that you don't follow the recommendation in the installation, which says don't allow access of Python. Not recommended to allow access of Python through anywhere on your computer. And if you click on that, all of a sudden it all starts working. So anyway, I'm running with VS Code. I've kind of found out right that there's lots of libraries out there, particularly in the astronomy world. Some of you are familiar with these, I'm sure, and others may not be, but there are some great libraries out there. And while I'm not familiar with what's in all of those libraries, they're certainly available. And one of the things I'm going to talk a lot about in a few moments is ChatGPT. And ChatGPT seems to have a fairly detailed knowledge of libraries, what libraries might be better than other libraries, and what the functionality of those libraries are. So if any of you are contemplating programming in Python, you're going to kind of get the story here that I'm pretty much enamored with what ChatGPT can do in terms of Python programming. It's also well supported. Apparently, it's interoperable with other languages in some way, shape, or form. I'm not really familiar with how you do that, but this particular point came out of ChatGPT when it was feeding me back the data for this slide. It's also very good for visualization, as we've seen from Photostats version 5. And it integrates with, a number of astronomy related things, including Sinbad and Gaia. Again, I haven't uh, found out how to do that yet, but I'm pretty confident that if I needed to, it would not be a difficult thing to do. Um, so certainly Python is the program of choice, it seems, in the astronomy world these days. And in many ways, it's been a good exercise to go through from a personal perspective because, we're obviously going to be using Python, whether it's with photostats or other things going forward. So according to ChatGPT, ChatGPT is your coding buddy. Um, and it's there to assist, explain, and inspire when it comes to Python, and I guess for that matter, any other language. I've used ChatGPT pretty heavily for the development of Arduino code for the various boxes that are in my remote observatory. And therefore, I guess it comes as no great surprise that when I started to think about should I be looking at Python programming, ChatGPT was the first place I went. Um, My experience of it so far is if you can accurately describe what you're trying to do, ChatGPT has got a good chance of coding it. Now, the way that you do that description is will certainly reflect on the success that you have of doing it. It's if you're able to break your descriptions down into precise, relatively short inquiries, it's much easier than going whole hog and throwing it a big problem, which it will certainly generate code and explanations and stuff, but it's obviously much more complicated than to start working out what's going wrong if things are going wrong. But generally speaking, my overall impression is if you can accurately describe what you're trying to do, um, ChatGPT can give you some pretty good Python coding.
Hey, Gary, can I ask a question? So
Yes.
Chat, I'm so out of it. Chat GPT is an AI assist for Python,
Yes.
right?
So
Okay.
ChatGPT is similar to Gemini, is similar to a whole number of other AI-based tools. ChatGPT is from OpenAI. It was the first AI-based tool that I started looking at. I am a huge fan. I literally use it now for almost everything that I do, from writing email responses to summarizing meetings to doing coding, helping my daughter who's got some learning challenges to navigate around those. But you could be using Gemini or other programs like that. Gemini is the Google version of an AI engine. So yes, it's easy to find. There's a free version that you can use. I actually do the paid version. It's $20 a month. It gives you different AI engines that you can use. I'm currently only using one of them, but the one of the really good things about the paid version is the fact that it kind of takes away all the restrictions on length of code you can produce, the amount of information that you can throw at it. You can start uploading documents, spreadsheets, all sorts of things, and started analyzing them. It's an incredibly powerful tool. And so for me, it was a no-brainer to start paying $20 a month to get that additional functionality. Any more questions on the? I kind of just assumed that people knew what ChatGPT was. Any more questions on ChatGPT before I sort of dive into things? Yeah, Laura.
I just would say that for those who never have used that before or are starting to use, ChatGPT is really good, but the only two things that you have to be aware before it is um ChatGPT sometimes calculate things a little bit wrong if you don't describe very well what you need. So always double check the output from ChatGPT because sometimes uh he gonna mess it up the units and have the right numbers but mess it up the units and things can get like, oh, it's a factor of 100 missing here, what's going on. And also just to you to know, maybe you don't have to be careful about it, but ChatGPT also can share information with the database from them because what ChatGPT do is basically the next word, each single word that ChatGPT gives to you as an answer, it's based on the probability of matching words. So it's a kind of a AI that is smart, but is a probability thing. So if you know it's I don't know if stable is very related to laptop, so the probability to give you table after laptop is higher than give you, I don't know, cup after ChatGPT types laptop and the answer. That's just an example. So this is why you have to be very careful when you upload things because one, um, you're gonna share that with the company that is building ChatGPT. Maybe you don't want to like have sensitive information being shared with them. And another thing it is maybe the result gonna be different, a little bit different than you're expecting. So just be careful with that. Otherwise, it's very good.
Yeah, so I think Laura raises a couple of really good points there. Definitely, you cannot believe everything that comes out of ChatGPT. It's very clever, or it appears very clever. It's very good at giving you information, but that information is not always correct. I've kind of experienced the same issue with coding with respect to units and stuff like that. Your descriptions do need to be precise. And the more precise they are, the better chance, obviously, the coding's got. But also, if there's false information out there, which is actually dominating the amount of information available on a given subject, it's going to spew it back at you because it uses this probability model. Another thing as well that I've noticed is that it will make stuff up sometimes. I'll give you a good example, references. If you ask for references for inclusion in a paper, it will give you good references and it will give you completely made up references that look great. They include an author, they include a journal, they include page numbers, but when you actually drill into it, it doesn't exist. Which is, I'm not too sure quite why it does that, but it does. And if you use it for generating references, you need to be careful. But it's like, in my opinion, it's like any tool that you have, right? If you use a calculator, even if you use a calculator, right, you're kind of making a bad assumption that, you type numbers in, numbers come out, and you write that number down and you believe it's correct, right? I mean, you have to run a sanity check on anything, and ChatGPT is kind of like that. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I do think it's something you need to be aware of.
Hey, Gary, I might want to mention something.
Sure.
Uh, Francois Tessier and another group posted a day or so ago an article that was probably written by some kind of an AI program, not necessarily ChatGPT, but it's a long pseudo-scientific article regarding TCRB and how TCRB actually did explode in a nova we were seeing at magnitude 2 by naked eye by astronomers throughout the summer. And it sounded very scientific, and it was just absolutely, completely erroneous. I mean, there was nothing in the article that was correct. And so Francois posted that to the spec group because he said this is the kind of stuff that can come out of misused information sources. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the unfortunate things that's happening, or the tool is able to do, or whichever way you want to describe it. I mean, I'm not sure I would describe myself as a super user of ChatGPT, but I use it heavily for a lot of different things on a variety of different subjects. And if you use it in the appropriate way, I mean, the productivity level that you can achieve is just staggering. I mean, for an example, I'll give you an example, right? You are aware of that 50 email thread that came out in the SDAA forum with respect to people's thoughts around our favorite topic of the electrical grid, right? And I was able to literally, my response to that group was basically generated by taking that email thread, the entirety of that email thread, putting it into ChatGPT, allowing it to address a number of issues within that, and then quickly editing that in order to make a politically correct statement back to the club from my perspective, right? Something that would have taken a huge amount of time. And you'll see with the programming that I've been doing. So it's a shame because I hear that argument a lot, and I understand it can do things like that. But I would say to anybody, give it a chance, see where you're at, and just make sure you're checking everything is where I would go. And for the large part, I found that in coding, it comes back with stuff that basically I can understand in Python. I've got no knowledge of Python syntax at all. Even if I can't necessarily understand it, at least I can follow what it's doing and then ask it specific questions around certain lines of code to get a full understanding of what it's doing. All right. So this is a question that I posed to ChatGPT the other day, and if nobody's actually, if you haven't seen ChatGPT working, I'm more than happy to actually show you it working if you want. But basically, it has a message window, and within the message window, you ask a question, and then you follow that question up with more questions and so forth and so on, and you get into this dialogue. So I basically asked it the first question. I want to write a generic Python framework that can be used for developing programs in the future. I want it to have an area where you can define parameters. I want a GUI of a certain size. I want to include 10 function blocks that are clearly labeled. I want to be able to go down through these function blocks with arrow control. And I want to be able to, once I've done my calculations in this generic framework, I want to be able to quit the program. And then, and it generated me the code, and I can actually cut and paste this into ChatGPT and show you it generating the code if you're interested. It will literally take about 25 seconds. And I then simply said to it, okay, after the first iteration of code that it gave me, please highlight the current function block in red, because it's obviously much easier for me to see where it sits in the program. So I am going to give you a quick demo, because as I said, within a few tens of seconds, you will get an answer. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. This is in VS Code. This is the code that was imported back after those two simple queries. It's about 114 lines of code.
And this is what ChatGPT wrote for you.
Yes. Yeah,
Wow.
this based on that description that I just showed you, nothing else, just that description. This is what it came back with. So I'm now going to try and run this. And I'm going to be interested to find out which. Okay, so can you see the framework now come up?
No.
Okay.
Oh, the GUI. No.
The GUI. You can't see the GUI?
No.
All right. So I'm going to have to go and find another screen a second. So just let me stop sharing on that.
Just share your whole desktop. You'll see them all.
Oh, good idea.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, don't share a window, share desktop.
Share.
It's like the big upper one on the left.
Okay. Okay, I can try that. Okay, do you see the GUI now?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the GUI that it generated. So basically, within each one of these blocks, you would then define the function that you're, interested in calculating. You've got 10 blocks to do whatever calculations and visualization you want to be able to do. And basically, you can step down through the GUI. So if you can imagine, each time you step into one of these function blocks, you're going to do some work and either display some numbers or create graphs or do something. It's just a framework, right? And you can go down through that section, or you can back up through the section. Now, quite how parameters and stuff like that would be handled if you decide to back up would be somewhat dependent upon obviously the way that the functional blocks are coded themselves. But in terms of the framework, it allows you to step forward and backwards in these blocks. And then once you've gone down and executed your various functional blocks, you would then quit the program because you've obviously calculated what you want. Right. So yeah, so this was the code. And basically ChatGPT generates the code in the message window and gives you a copy code button, and you can then just cut and paste that code into, whichever editor or whatever you're using. So that was the demo of the framework. So, and I didn't actually write this first. I actually leapt into photostats first, but I just wanted to show you how easy it is to develop a framework, or obviously any type of program, right, based on a relatively simple query. So let's go to Bob's program, photostats version 5. So for those of us who have been running it, and there's currently 6 people assigned to the group that's looking at the data analysis. We know that Bob's program offers a great way of calculating flare energies for a number of predefined flares within a data set that's downloaded from the AAVSO. And that data set is for an individual observation run by an observer in a given band. And we have downloaded, I think Bob's downloaded over 500 of these measurement files, which are in a standard AAVSO format that it spits back at you when you do a query. And there is obviously going to be many, many more files, because for one thing, mine are only up to date until September. So I've still got all of September and October to upload to the AAVSO. And Bob has demonstrated to us in previous meetings how photostats works and stuff like that. The weakness with the current version of photostats, as I saw it, and I've kind of had this conversation a little bit with Bob, although for a variety of reasons, including Bob's sickness, we didn't really get into it in any detail. I found when I was using the program, the problem is that you've got so many input values to put in. You need to define the quiescent range. You need to define the flare ranges. You've got a whole number of parameters that need to be put in correctly, because otherwise the program crashes. And I found that I was, a lot of my runs were basically aborting because I wasn't doing that, or I was making errors when I was transcribing the data across and stuff like that. So I've kind of wondered whether it was possible to do that. And I don't know what you think, Bob. How quickly do you think you can process an individual file using Photostats 5 at the moment?
Well, once you get into the zone and start doing one file after another, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes per observation set, probably.
Okay. Well, I was definitely not 2 to 3 minutes. I was probably more like 10 to 15 minutes, and a certain degree of choice language.
That's what I mean, by in the zone. You say,
Yes.
I open the file,
right.
I got to enter the star name in the observer code and pick the quiescent levels and all that. But once you get into that cycle, it's kind of click, 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 you know what to do.
Right. Okay. Well, not being the most patient person in the world, I started thinking about revising the front end. And so I came up with a couple of goals. One was to remove the need to transfer and type the required parameters. And the second one was to allow the user to analyze the data set within a minute. Those were my kind of goals. Mm-hmm. And with that in mind, I then started entering a lot of, I started obviously with the original code, which I loaded into ChatGPT, and then started asking a lot of questions around the code and how it was put together and how it might be optimized and so forth and so on. Now, what I did find was that trying to move forward then from a basis of that code, so V5, and asking it to make modifications to the code it was too complex a process to describe accurately. So what I decided to do was to write a front end first, basically starting with simple descriptions of what I was looking for, a little bit like what I showed you with the framework. So I am now going to show you what that front end looks like. And this was basically the code that I sent you, Bob, about 2 weeks, a little less than 2 weeks ago. So this is the code that is the front end, or what my proposed front end is for Photostats. Give you an idea of length, it's about 260 lines of code. This was generated probably using 20 or 30 prompt descriptions for what I was looking to achieve, slowly building on the basis of what I'd done before. And you have to be very careful with file management here, because sometimes ChatGPT seems to lose the plot and starts generating code that looks good, but once you start running it, you realize that something's gone wrong. So you need to be very careful with code management in terms of making sure that you've always got a version, a last working version saved somewhere before you overwrite it and suddenly realize you've stepped back tremendously. But if you're prepared to do that, it works well. So I'm going to try and run this. Okay. So hopefully you're now seeing a window,
Yep.
which is the GUI window. So this is basically the front end. So you click on load file. These, Laura, are standard format CSV files that come from, well, actually they're CSV files that have been generated from data that came from the AAVSO. Bob wrote a program to generate these files, but I'm using this as the format. So if I click on one of these files, you can see a preview of what I'm about to load in. It's a lot of data. It includes things like timestamps and magnitudes and errors and what filters being used and who the observer was, what sort of comp stars were being used, etc., etc. So I'm going to open this file. And the first thing it does is generates the plot that you've seen. Now, in Bob's program, you then basically moused over the area that you wanted to define for the quiescent level. You wrote those times down, this being the time along the bottom. You wrote those times down and you manually input those times into a query box. You also did that for defining where the flares are. So with this program, you don't need to do that. You can basically right click and it goes through in a specific order. The first thing it does is it allows you to generate 2 quiescent regions, and then it will allow you to define up to 3 flare regions. So I will mouse over to where I want to go and right click, and then I will mouse to the next part of the quiescent region. So I'm going to define the end of the quiescent region. I'm going to right click again, and you'll see it goes green. And you'll also see that the quiescent timestamp is now written here. So it's being captured by the program. So now I am going to, and unfortunately can I get rid? Yes, I can get rid of that. Okay, so now I'm going to go to another area that I'm going to define for quiescence. And I think that to me seems to be this area here. So I'm going to right click there, and that defines the beginning of the quiescent region number 2. And I'm going to right click here, and that defines the end of it. And you can see that's gone green as well. And all of this data is being obviously loaded into parameters because you obviously, ideally don't want to be typing this. So now we get to defining the flare. So I'm going to look at this and I'm going to think, well, I think the flare starts about here. I'm going to right click, and I think it finishes probably right over here somewhere. I'm going to right click, and the flare goes red. So it's now captured the first flare in terms of the timestamps for the what you believe is the beginning of the end. And then here we possibly have got a second little flare. So I'm going to right click, and I'm going to define the second flare. Now, if there was a third flare on here, I could do the same thing and it would just automatically then stop asking. But because I've only defined 2 flares, I press the end key, and that will basically say there's no further flares to define. And you'll see in the thing down here that the third flare beginning and end time points have not been done. And basically that's the front end GUI, in so much as it allows you to load the data, define the quiescent region, which we need in order to calculate the energy within the flare itself, because we obviously need to take away the quiescent region, and to define the flare of interest or flares of interest that you're that you want to do. Okay, any questions on that?
This looks pretty neat.
Yes. Well, again, I wish I could take credit for it. I was able to describe what I wanted, and after a number of iterations, this is kind of what came together. Basically, you can do this entire process to this point, right, without actually inputting a single value. It's mouse clicks, and it's all right mouse clicks, and it can be done. I mean, you could probably do this in 20 seconds if you wanted to.
Hey, Gary, can we show Laura what we did before?
Sure, I can
I can share it. I have it up already.
Sure. Okay, if you want to do that.
To see where we were coming from and where you got us to.
Yeah, okay.
Can you see it?
Let me stop sharing.
Okay.
Okay, so you're now sharing. Yeah.
I just want to show
Yeah.
that this is the previous version of photostats. So what Gary did is he's using a graphic to input these quiescent and flare starts and begins. And I think in this code, we can do 3 flares.
Yeah.
And we can do 3 quiescents. But what Gary's done is all these are done by mouse clicks now on the graph itself. And that's all I want to share.
Okay. No,
so we know where we are at.
Yeah. So that was photostats version 5. And this is kind of a new front end to that. So once, and at this point, my goal was to actually get with Bob and to start discussing the math side of this, because Bob is the one that generated the document for us, notes on calculating flare energy, that describes all the math that we need to use to do this. But sadly, Bob was sick, and it got me thinking, could I do it? So the math proved a lot trickier. I got the framework sorted out, and I tried 3 or 4 times to do the math side of it, and each time I seemed to get bogged down, and I wasn't either asking the right questions or putting the prompts together in the right way that the code carried on working. So what I ended up doing was, the first thing I ended up doing was I took Bob's document and uploaded it to ChatGPT, which is interesting because I hadn't really thought of Laura's comment earlier where she was saying, of course, you're now making that public. So we might have to be a little picky as to what we might upload to a tool of this type. And I basically asked it to analyze the document, and it came back with a fairly simple breakdown of the math that is the main math within the document, of what we're trying to do here, right? We're looking to define the quiescent luminosity from the two quiescent regions that you define so that you can subtract that from the area that you define as your flare, so that you then end up with the true flare luminosity, and from that you do an integral to calculate the flare energy. And once I kind of re-looked at this again, I realized that I could probably, now I had a little bit better of a handle on it, I could probably start asking prompts that would go through this. So, Photostats V6 alpha version is now, I'm going to try and demo that. All right. Hopefully you guys can see that. All right. So RedB is nearly 500 lines of Python code. That includes the front end and the majority of the math. Not all of the math, but the majority of it. So if I run that, hopefully you'll see that it isn't actually too much different from, here we go. So again, I can load a file. I can define my quiescent region. So I'm going to right click, and then define my flares, right click, right click. And I haven't got a third flare, so I'm going to press end. If I expand this window up, you'll see that it's captured all that data, and I'll now go to the calculation section. It draws the quiescent state based on the slope and the intercept that it calculates out of the quiescent regions that you calculated, and it now uses that as the basis for isolating the energy under the flare and therefore calculating energy. Now
Very elegant, Gary. Very elegant.
Well, again, I can't really take credit for this, right? I mean, if you ask me, if you sit me down with VS Code and ask me to write Python, I'm stuck. All right. I mean, I just cannot, I don't think I could write a simple Python program because I don't know the syntax. I think what this is an illustration of is the fact that for any of you, if you've got stuff that you want to do in Python, but you've not made that step into the Python world, ChatGPT or similar tools offer you a way into that world where you can generate some pretty complex thing. I mean,